Okay, thank you. Yeah, so welcome to our talk on how to launch a service across local government. Today we will be sharing some insights from our work on a back office planning system, or BOPS for short, which is a long-running project funded by central government and delivered collaboratively with a growing community of local authorities. Just to briefly introduce Unboxed, we are a service design and digital product development agency. We've got about 20 years experience of embedding the principles of user-centered design and agile product development into different organizations. We believe that a radical collaboration is essential to deliver meaningful change, and that designers have a crucial role in helping achieve large-scale and long-term impact. We work predominantly, but not exclusively, in the public sector, and most of our recent work has been in local government. So my name's Martin Evans. I'm head of product at Unboxed and one of the two directors, and I've been at Unboxed for nearly 11 years now. And in that time, I feel I've seen some real progress in the adoption of digital thinking in the public sector, largely influenced by the government digital service, who started to show the world how government departments could create really good digital services. In my opinion, this has had a hugely beneficial impact on simple transactional services, but it hasn't really delivered with highly complex services, nor has it really delivered results in local government yet. I'm hoping that we can offer some advice today on how we, as a community, might achieve more.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm one of the designers at Unboxed. I joined Unboxed actually 3 years ago this week. I've been involved in a number of projects in local government over that time. And within my first couple of days at Unboxed, I joined a big digital transformation project with Buckinghamshire Council, working with 5 local authorities and 2 partner agencies, and it was quite daunting to be kind of jump straight into a project like that. But one of the first things I was asked to do there was to speak to everyone that had been involved in the project so far, listen to any frustrations, and look at what tools and approaches they were using to start to pull together a kind of overarching approach that had evolved over the course of the project. And what I learned very quickly was that collaboration was really fundamental to making change stick in local authorities, but also that collaboration comes in many forms and needs just as much time as the more tangible bits of delivery. So we're going to talk a bit about that. So this talk is titled How to Launch a Service Across Local Government, but I just want to make it clear we're not here to give you all the answers. We want to share what we've learned, some of the problems we've faced, and the approaches we've taken to address these problems. A lot of it is to do with collaboration, as we've said, which is constantly evolving as we learn more about the challenges to launching services. And we're certainly not here to bash local government. We've worked with many brilliant teams, lots of people who are here today, who've helped us develop great products. But we all know about some of the big barriers to rolling out sustainable, viable products and services that meet the needs of the people that use them. And for us, this has included planners, housing repairs teams, social care finance teams, and many others. So this is a bit more of a provocation and a call to action, and we'd love to hear your thoughts a bit later in the talk. You're on mute, Martin.
So the title of this talk refers to launching a service, and it was originally delivered at a conference called Service Design in Government. But if you ask the team at Unboxed, and I suspect many service designers, especially in the public sector, what it is they spend most time doing or designing, they would probably say products, and digital products specifically. I'm just gonna, we work with a lot of organizations, especially those going through transformation or change, who talk about building capacity and capability in product design or service design, or they want to introduce a product thinking or a service mindset. And I think ultimately they're talking about the same thing. They're talking about a focus on customer needs, user-centered or human-centered design, but it's often not really clear to the teams who need to change what the difference is. So I think it's worth just exploring these terms a little bit further. So this is my simple definition of a service. It describes a service as intangible. It's an activity or a sequence of activities that help our customers or our users achieve some kind of goal. It meets their need. As Lou Downe said almost 10 years ago, a good service is a verb. It involves doing. And a service is kind of produced and consumed at the same time, simultaneously. Whereas a product, on the other hand, is a more tangible thing. It's a physical thing, a noun, if you like. It can be produced and then purchased and then consumed at a later date. So we know that most products need a service wrapped around them if they're to succeed. So customer service, for example, provides that wrapper, adding value for customers after the point of purchase of a product. But it's also true that most services require some kind of product or products. I would even go as far as say digital products to enable the delivery of that service, to deliver value to the customer. So I'm talking here when I talk about products, I'm talking about websites, applications, software, management systems, technology products, basically. Now, we believe that local government needs innovation in its service delivery. It constantly needs to do more and better for less, and digital products should be about enabling that service innovation. But in our experience, technology is not an enabler. In fact, it's far more often a hindrance to innovation, a blocker of sorts. Public servants are constantly constrained by the lack of effective modern technology products. They're asked to transform their services using tools that don't appear to have changed since the 90s. Now, we know how to design better services and we know how to create better digital products, but unfortunately, Laura?
Councils keep buying crap software and they usually know it, but it's not necessarily their fault. And we'd like to propose some things that we should be doing to change that. So we're going to reference a case study throughout this talk. This is a long-running project which is still ongoing, and we've chosen it so we can look at how a central government-funded approach has enabled new product and service development in a core area for local government, and that's planning. We spent some time interviewing planning officers, local and central government employees, providers, and procurement officers to inform this talk. So a big thank you to everyone who shared their time with us. Our case study is the Back Office Planning System, or BOPS for short. BOPS is a system to facilitate the processing of planning applications from the point of submission to the point of a decision being made. Put very simply, it's something that planning officers and managers can use to assess a planning application and make a decision about whether to give permission or not. So it should be a relatively simple process within an incredibly complex system. BOPS was conceived in part to deliver user-centered tools for planning officers, improved efficiency and accuracy through better design. And it also had a remit to be an enabler of a wider digital revolution in the planning service. Planning is a very document-heavy process, but we wanted BOP to support an approach of data, not documents, bringing the right information to planning officers at the right moment. It had to be part of an ecosystem of open and interoperable tools that could deliver not just incremental improvements, but hold the planning system into the 21st century. Initially, this was a local digital fund project, and alongside some other projects that came out of that fund, it was brought together into the Open Digital Planning Programme led by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, or MHCLG. There are very few options for back office planning systems in the market and no real impetus for those providers to improve their products. So our aim is to establish a viable alternative to these existing systems. But planning is huge and complex and involves an enormous amount of data. And we had to develop and test this with planners while they were still using those legacy systems to do their day job. So it's taken us about 5 years to get close to launch. And in that time, we've been working with MHCLG and a number of councils I think we have over 20 council partners, and we have a product in beta testing. So there are really positive signs that BOPS will be successful. So we've built lots of great relationships. We've delivered a product that makes it much easier and quicker for planning officers to do their job. But when it comes to using BOPS to launch a more efficient back office planning service across many councils, we found several challenges which broadly fall into 3 categories. So here's the first big challenge. Every council thinks they need something different to other councils. In planning, there are many things that are the same across councils, national policy and legislation, for example, but there are some things that need to be localized, for example, local plans and guidance. An urban council like Southwark is going to focus on different parts of the legislation than a rural council. However, there are many processes which are done differently due to things like culture or the way it's always been done here, or sometimes just change fatigue. I've even had some people tell me they do things differently in different teams because one manager has a different interpretation of policy than another manager. So when councils need a digital product to help them deliver their service, they might all buy different products, or they buy the same products, but configure them in different ways. And highly configurable software seems really attractive to buyers, but the truth is that highly configurable software needs compromises and is rarely great for doing a really specific job. So councils then adapt their processes to allow for or even work around the software, meaning that over time the services become increasingly misaligned across councils and often result in complexity within the product. And that can create barriers to integration. And also working with one council at a time to solve the same problem is pretty wasteful and inefficient, and nothing's really going to change that way. So what do we do about it? Well, the answer is collaboration. Here's a quote from a planner who's become a real advocate for a service design-led approach. And she's actually taken some of our methodology and for co-design and testing and used it within her own team. So Jo said, the greatest value of ODP is the involvement in the design process, being able to make comments and recommendations, having the whole team fully involved in that process. So we've only been able to challenge the perceived need for localization and bespoke systems because we spent a lot of time working with users to understand what they really need. Most planning officers acknowledge that existing software isn't very good. However, all their current processes are built around those existing products, and they're often experts with that piece of software. So their frame of reference for describing their needs is limited by the existing product, and they often want the new product to do pretty much everything that the old products do, only better, and they might want it to do some other things too. So in order to take variations between councils into account, our delivery team includes 3 product owners from different councils and many planners. And we spent a lot of time building the trust that allows us to challenge their thinking about what they want and what they actually need. And we worked hard to demystify the design and development process and coach them in product thinking. So one example we have for this is site notices. So most people have seen a site notice pinned to a lamppost before. This is a legal requirement when certain types of planning application are submitted. But every council does site notices differently. And we needed to be able to produce a site notice template within BOPS so that it could be automatically generated and sent to print to be put up in the right place. So initially we found Lambeth included certain information and Southwark included something else and Gloucester something else. And they were all kind of formatted differently in different ways. So we brought some planners together. We set out the legislation about what actually needs to be in a site notice and set out some user needs based on what a neighbour or resident needs to know when reading a site notice. And very quickly together, we designed the content around the commonality between these things. So there's a balance between standardization and flexibility, but grounded in a really shared understanding of needs.
Thanks, Laura. So yes, the next challenge, the software market is broken. Right now, the software suppliers have all the power in this relationship with local government. There's only, as Laura mentioned, there's only a handful of viable options for back office planning systems, and as a result, there's little need for innovation. There's few drivers for innovation. They're fairly generic case management systems that have been adapted to handle planning or have a planning module bolted on. And if new players do manage to get traction within the market, they're often acquired by the existing providers and presented as an essential upgrade, implemented at great expense to each individual council, and then essentially neglected until they themselves become legacy. The systems are closed, meaning that they rarely integrate with other systems, unless, of course, the councils pay for it, and the data within them is stored in proprietary databases that can only be migrated to new alternative systems at, you've guessed it, great expense to the councils. So this is a quote from Emily, who leads on the different products within the Open Digital Planning Programme. LPAs are used to not having a lot of choice and agency in the tools they use. They don't feel like there's a lot of scope to make changes or different choices. So this quote speaks to those problems in the market. Tools simply don't work for the people that use them every day, and those people don't have much say in choosing them or even improving what they've got. What we've learned is that this leads to workarounds, people creating their own spreadsheets and processes to get the job done. This takes time, it's demotivating, it produces inconsistencies, and it can also lead to mistakes, which in planning can have very costly and time-consuming consequences. So a planning officer gave us an example that if a consultation letter hadn't been sent out to a particular person, then the whole consultation process effectively has to start again. It's kind of reset, which means going back several weeks in the process and repeating the tasks you've just done. It's expensive, embarrassing, and of course, time consuming. So we're strong believers in the concept that innovation is mostly about people and change. Technology is just something that supports those things. So we believe that people should feel ownership over their technology rather than it being something that dictates how they work. So how have we responded to this challenge? We know there's a market for bots. All councils need back office planning software, and most want something that is better than what they've already got. We decided to take a minimum viable product approach to bots and focus on delivering something that was genuinely useful for our users, planning officers, with an initial focus on permitted development, which is one of the simpler forms of planning application. And whilst we were able to deliver a working product to meet the needs of planning officers processing these applications, the product was actually far from viable. So firstly, all planning applications need to be published on a planning register, which was provided as an add-on to the existing software, and which of course we weren't able to integrate with. So not only did this mean that we would have to provide a solution for all types of planning application, but we would also need to provide a new register, something that had always been considered out of scope for BOPs. Secondly, BOPs only delivers part of the service. But right from the start, we've been working in close collaboration with Planex, another product, which provides a tool for applicants to decide if they need planning permission and then send that application through to the council. Now, Camden Council have also joined the ODP programme, expanding their work on digital site notices to provide a planning register. So by working with Planex and the digital site notice team and these other product teams, we can ensure that together these products deliver a better end-to-end service. Now, thirdly, we had to think about what BOPs could replace in the council ecosystem. Many existing providers of planning software also provide modules for things like building control and licensing, which are not the responsibility of planning teams, but are part of the same software licensing deal and can't really be procured individually. So we're now working with other departments to understand the best approach, build new features in BOPs, build new applications that follow the same principles as BOPs, or find existing suppliers that also follow those principles and can provide open and user-friendly software. I don't know who's familiar with the three horizons model of future planning, but what I also think is lacking is the third horizon, which is this vision of a viable future. So people don't really consider long-term viability, the commercial sustainability of the services they're designing or the products they are building or even procuring. Central government funding tends to support projects, as do internal budgets, so fixed periods of time. But for BOPs to be considered a success, for it to deliver the outcomes it's been designed to deliver, it needs to be adopted by many councils, and that is going to take time. The Open Digital Planning team at MHCLG have done a fantastic job of preparing councils to contribute and eventually adopt the products. There's a lot of investment in education and community building, which is fantastic. They're funding council partners to free up the time of planning teams or recruit new team members to fully participate in this process. And whilst we are working on it in collaboration with the other product partners in MHCLG, we still don't really know what the commercial model will be for BOPs and the other products in the program going forward. Who will run and maintain the system? How much will it cost? What will be the route to market? So I'm just going to give you a moment to read this quote from Alistair Parvin, who is the Open Systems Lab, is the company that builds Planex, which I mentioned before. I'll read it through. We need shared products and platforms and institutions that allow councils to club together to solve common problems. This collaboration is a secret superpower. So I think the really interesting thing in this quote is this idea of new institutions. Councils don't really have a commercial product mindset, and nor should they really. They have other more important things to think about in public service. This commercial thinking is generally the domain of the private sector, but when left entirely to the private sector, we end up in the situation we currently have with planning software. It's easier to invest in selling an aging existing product rather than investing in developing the products to meet evolving needs and contexts. So we're working towards a new kind of organization. We've got some ideas about what that operating model should do. And here, here's some of our thinking. We believe it should remain open source, and that open source code should be available to any council that wants to pick it up. It's an important principle of the program is open source technology. We need to ensure that many councils can use the product, regardless of their size or location. We need planning officers to continue to drive the ongoing development of the product, the users of the system, as the needs of their service changes over time, e.g. as new policy is introduced. While councils might not own the technology as such, they need to feel like they own the process of ongoing development. And finally, we need the product to generate enough revenue to reinvest in ongoing product development whilst remaining affordable. Not much to ask, but the focus should remain on delivering value to the planning system, not delivering dividends to private shareholders. I've just got a little example of how we've tried to tackle this problem in the past. So in 2016, we at Unboxed created a community interest company called Logov to create a commercial structure for this kind of organization. The idea was that councils could pay a license fee to reuse software that had been created by other councils. Some of that license fee would go back to the original council, repaying their investment in the product. The rest would be invested back into the product itself. And whilst it got some traction, Logov ultimately failed, or at least it has so far. And I think that the main problem was that products and services we offered were created by individual councils and not created in collaboration. So I'm just going to pause and take a breath and hear if anybody's got any thoughts. We've talked about these three challenges: councils thinking they need lots of different things, a market that doesn't work, and a lack of long-term thinking. Does anyone at this point, would anyone like to come off mute and share any thoughts or drop anything in the chat for us to discuss?
Yeah, I would like to add something, and I should just disclose that I did have a role in putting this together. So this is this difficult question also is comes from my sort of perspective of having sort of asked it, but it's interesting when I think we say councils as they're sort of like this one amorphous blob of people who think all the same way, and in my experience it's very, very much not that. So I wonder, you know, how much we've had to sort of understand some of the internal differences of opinion and politics of, you know, and even approaches and strategies, even differing between, you know, someone starting their first job, someone who's been doing it for 20 years, someone who works in, you know, who's looking at a budget sheet, and how that sort of impacts that kind of diversity of thought across councils.
Yeah, I could pick that. I mean, I think there's two aspects to that. One is from a diversity of users of the system, and I think we're used to having to understand the requirements, the needs of a diverse set of users. I mean, users even within planning teams, as you say, there's people with different a different range of experience and attitudes and attitudes to change, I suppose. But I think there's another question. You're right. Councils, or even an individual council, is lots of often quite siloed organisations or bits of the organisation. For example, finance teams, procurement, IT, all have often slightly different relationships to the planning team, for example. So we do need to understand that complexity. We might talk a bit more about that, Thomas, as we go through the rest of the talk, because I think, you know, we're just hoping to kick off a bit of work to really get a bit beyond planning through to the buyers of the software or the people that support the technology. But it's a good question, and it's tricky. Laura, do you want to say anything about that before we move on?
I don't think I can really add to what you said. I mean, my perspective is from the user research and testing perspective. Work, as you say, it's really important to work with people with a wide range of experience, from newly qualified planners to people with 20, 30 years of experience that have seen and tried everything and found their own workarounds. And we have to learn from both of those groups of people. Yeah.
I think there's a really specific thing about designing back office system where, you know, one of the principles of designing good interactions is that it should be intuitive and people should know how to use it. But we've got a combination of maybe very young and inexperienced people who are new to the system. And then you might have people who've been using it for a long, long time and just want the quickest way to do something. They don't need everything explained. So in terms of user needs, it's quite interesting. But I'm going to move on, if that's all right. We can have some more questions at the end. Laura, I think I'm handing over to you.
Yeah. So as we said, we presented this at a service design conference, and we had some thoughts about what we think service designers need to do about this and our role in that. And we'll go through some of those things now, but most of them come down to instigating and encouraging radical collaboration in lots of different ways. So we're thinking about before we start a project or a process of product development, we need to consider those procurement challenges and what the commercial model might look like. It's not good enough just to deliver a great service, because it's really useless if nobody adopts it. So we might start by collectively developing a commercial vision and mapping what's needed to achieve this alongside a vision for the product or service. And that means we need to look at the blockers that sit within procurement processes and understand what we can do about them, if anything. And if we can't do anything, we still need to understand how they're going to impact our vision and our roadmap. And I think it's really important for service designers to have a role in that. It's not just something that sits within another team. And then during the planning stage of the project, we need to work in a way that engages people such that they're fully bought into the product. So a lot of this is about giving enough time to people, culture change, and creating the operating conditions for the product or the service to flourish. And this might mean different roles or different ways of working, and bringing people into a definition of what is desirable, what's feasible, and what's viable for users, for the council, and for communities. So all of that takes time in things like collaborative sketching sessions, user research and testing, We've done things like going out on roadshows and engagement sessions with planning teams. We've really tried to put ourselves in front of them. And we spend a lot of time getting to know people in their environment and building trust in, not just in us, but trust in themselves to speak up and say what they need to do their job. So finally, during delivery, when we're actually developing this product, basically as service designers, we need to design ourselves out of a job, giving users, planners and product owners the skills and tools to design the product or service, while we spend more time designing organizations and systems, creating those conditions and interactions that enable good service delivery, progressive procurement and product improvement. And keep asking what's procurable enough, what's going to get this adopted, and how do we bring with it an environment that supports change. The product itself doesn't need to be all singing and all dancing immediately. As we've seen, it's really impossible to do that for every local authority's needs. And that's where technology often fails. It needs to be enough to start with, but also have the flexibility to allow the people who use it to improve it and take ownership of how it develops. And all of that comes through constant collaboration.
So I think we're just kind of wrapping up now, really. But as we said at the start of this talk, we believe in this kind of radical collaboration, that this radical collaboration is key to untangling some of the knotty problems that we face, and that service designers are really well placed to enable this collaboration. One of the talks that preceded ours at Service Design and Government was a keynote by Rachel Caldicott, and she referred to a need for different coalitions at the service delivery level. So we need all the actors in this system to open up to a deeper, more sophisticated collaboration. The ODP program represents an amazing collaboration between central government and local government, and I'm convinced that their insistence on an enablement of that collaboration between local authorities will deliver great long-term benefits. We also see the benefits of close collaboration between policymakers and the product teams within ODP. So as an example of this, I'm sure everyone in the room will have some experience of having to design around policy, and planning is very policy heavy. And one major problem for policymakers is the lack of useful planning data to interrogate, and BOPS is playing to interrogate policy, success policy, and BOPS is playing a key role in helping them to solve that problem. A key goal of MHCLG is to standardize data, but the formation and adoption of data standards can be a long-winded and challenging process. But through BOPS collaboration with policymakers, we've been able to help form data standards which can be agreed upon, implemented and iterated upon incredibly quickly. So this involved creating a learning loop with products that are part of live services, feeding back and informing the data standards and policies. So only through collaboration has this happened and helped bridge that gap from policy in the abstract to delivery on the ground. So one of the kind of outcomes of this is this iterative process is that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 gives the government the power to enforce those data standards on planning system providers, in the kind of knowledge that the standards can be applied quickly, that they are practical, and they do open up possibilities. So I'd also say that finally, we just need a closer collaboration between the public and the private sector to form these new coalitions or institutions, and ensure that the products we provide are commercially sustainable and can evolve and improve over time. Just going to leave you with a quote from Ed, who's one of our product owners. Software should be viewed as an opportunity, not an expense. And I think this just calls out to procurement teams. We'd love to encourage procurement teams to rethink the way they operate and work far more closely with designers, developers, subject matter experts, and even suppliers to really make sure that the products they buy or build really meet the needs of users and can genuinely support the delivery of better public services over time. I think that's us.
Yeah. Thank you. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions? I think we can maybe just stop the recording now and we'll have a bit of a discussion.